Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Cleveland Indians baseball books. The first book today is The Curse of Rocky Colavito by Terry Pluto, 1994. This is a tremendous book. It's a history of the Cleveland Indians from 1960 to 1994. So, the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and some hard times. And well, they didn't do very well. But all these fellows that I was familiar with as a boy, guys like Gaylord Perry and Charlie Spikes, guys in my era, Rick Manning, Frank Robinson, Boog Powell, George Hendrick, Oscar Gamble, Rick Manning, lots of tremendous players back. And then the 80s, Phil Niekro and Joe Carter, Andre Thornton. Back in the 60s, I was really too young to. I was born in 1960, and the title deals with when we traded Rocky Colavito. I believe in 1960, the Indians didn't do well after that. So this is a wonderful book, and Terry Pluto is an outstanding sports writer from Akron, Ohio. The next book is Indians Memories: The Most Memorable Heroes, Heartaches, and Highlights by Tim Long and Don Fox, 1997. This is a very short book that has these anecdotes about the guys that we support and we root for, the Cleveland Indians, over the years. The next book is Endless Summers: The Fall and Rise of the Cleveland Indians by Jack Torrey, 1995. This is an outstanding book. It talks about how in the late 1950s, the Indians were finishing, and they were a strong contender actually, but the Yankees would win almost every year, but the Indians were strong. They were finishing second place every year, but finally the attendance started falling, and then there were financial problems with the team, and then they made a terrible error. They cut the budget for the minor league teams, and that ensured we were not going to be getting good players. That was a big mistake, but that's what they did to try to balance the budget. And so the Indians remained lousy throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s. And then Dick Jacobs became the owner, Dick and his brother David, and he helped turn things around. Hank Peters, who was the general manager, and then John Hart. And then they turned things around, and they started developing young players, and they made some good trades. So then the Indians became a contender again back in the mid 1990s into the late 1990s. Did real well. The next book is Burying the Curse by Terry Pluto, 1995. This is a book about the 1995 Cleveland Indians. Wow, what a year. They had a tremendous record. They had all this hitting. Albert Bell was a big slugger. Carlos Baerga, Kenny Lofton, who was the speedy center fielder, stole a lot of bases. Dennis Martinez, who had been a star for the Baltimore Orioles. He was a great pitcher. And then Orel Hershiser, who had helped the Dodgers win a World Series in 1988. Jim Thome recently was inducted in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Manny Ramirez, another guy, I think he hit 600-plus home runs, or close to that. Eddie Murray, a star with Baltimore, who helped us. Omar Vizquel, the tremendous shortstop. So that was a wonderful year. We made it to the World Series, lost in 6 against a very tough Atlanta Braves team that had very strong pitching. But anyway, 1995 was a wonderful year, and so this is kind of the sequel to The Curse of Rocky Colavito, that he saying, well, the curse has been buried. It's over. Now we're a good team. Although the thing is, we didn't win the World Series back in the late 1990s. But still, we had a lot of good times with those teams. The next book is Our Tribe by Terry Pluto, 1999. This is a wonderful book, again by Terry Pluto. And he talks about, we're Cleveland Indians fans rooting for the team, and good times, bad times. And a lot about this is fathers and sons and his relationship with his father. This is a big part of being a sports fan, is that you watch the games with your father, and you go to the games and you talk about the games. And in this book, Pluto's father had a stroke, and they were watching the 1997 World Series together, but they couldn't. His father couldn't really speak So it was kind of sad. And anyway, and this book reminded me of my father. We went to a lot of games back in the 1970s at the old Cleveland Municipal Stadium. And that was, it was a wonderful thing, father-son thing, and watching games on TV. And I always wanted to see Cleveland win a championship, and it never happened. But then my father died. But then when the Cavs won in 2016, I was thinking about my father. So I thought that was kind of nice. And when the Indians lost the 1997 World Series, my father wrote me a letter. I was in the Philippines. He said, he wrote that the Indians came within a whisker of winning the World Series, which I thought was a wonderful attitude. The next book is Me and the Spitter by Gaylord Perry with Bob Sudik, 1974. Now, this book gave English teachers fits, because it's bad grammar. It ought to have been the Spitter and I, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, Gaylord Perry, boy, what a tremendous player. And, he won the Cy Young Award pitching for Cleveland in 1972. He was a tremendous pitcher, won more than 300 games. And we traded him. We thought, he was... I guess they thought he was getting too old, but he won a lot of games after that, and he won the Cy Young Award, I think, with San Diego. And one interesting thing from this book is I realized that Cy Young, Bob Feller, and Gaylord Perry all grew up on a farm, and they did a lot of farm work growing up. I think this helped them, become physically strong, helped them as baseball players. Anyway, Gaylord Perry, he was our ace pitcher back in the early 1970s. He threw a spitball, which was illegal, and he was getting in trouble. And they were always guys like Billy Martin would demand the umpires go out and check Perry. They'd come out and trying to see if he had any foreign substances. The next book is The Cleveland Indians Encyclopedia by Russell Schneider, 1996. Wow, this is the ultimate book about the Cleveland Indians because it's very long and very complete. It has every year of the Cleveland Indians. It has a summary of the year and the statistics for all the players. So you can go back to your favorite years and look up the guys and check your memory, see how they did. It's wonderful remembering. In my case, 1973 was the first year I started following the Cleveland Indians. So it's fun to go back and look at the stats, the home runs, and how the pitchers did, and their ERA and batting averages and stuff like that. So it's a lot of fun. So a lot of guys that I am nostalgic about: Charlie Spikes, Joe Carter, Andre Thornton, Rico Cardi, Dave LaRoche, all these guys Jim Kern, Fritz Peterson, all these fellas that that were my heroes, and I'm still very nostalgic about. The next book is Lou Boudreau, Covering All the Bases by Lou Boudreau with Russell Schneider, 1993. Now, Russell Schneider was the outstanding Cleveland Plain Dealer sports writer who covered the Indians back in the 70s. And this is a wonderful book about the player-manager of the 1948 World Series champions Cleveland Indians. And he was hired as player manager in 1942 when he was only 24. Just imagine. And then when they won the World Series, he was only 30. So he was a young guy, and he was playing shortstop, real good hitter. And they used to call, by the old stadium, that the street was called Boudreau Boulevard. But I think that's been, I think the name has been changed. But boy, Lou Boudreau really did a lot for Cleveland. And so I wrote in my book diary, "Thanks for everything, Lou. We'll never forget you. Promise." He was a good guy, Lou Boudreau. God bless him. The next book is Cleveland Indians Facts and Trivia by Mark Davis, 1997. Yeah, this book, I've become so obsessed with the Cleveland Indians. When I read this book, I didn't learn anything new. Everything in the book I already knew. The next book is Veck, as in Wreck, by Bill Veck with Ed Lynn, published in 1962 and then republished in 1975. Boy, what an amazing book this is, an amazing man, a very inspiring story of the life of Bill Veck, the Cleveland Indians owner in 1948 when they won the World Series. And he was so creative and innovative. He had been in the Marines in the Second World War, and it was at Guadalcanal. He'd been very badly wounded, and he had part of his foot amputated. And he was having, over the years, they kept cutting off more of his foot because of infection. but it didn't stop him. He was very outgoing. He liked to sit with the fans, and he wanted to talk with them and get ideas. He had like ladies' night where the women would get flowers or roses when they'd enter the stadium, or sometimes he'd give away nylon stockings. And he was a pioneer in bringing African Americans into baseball, because he signed Larry Doby, who was a very big star of the 1948 Indians, and also Satchel Paige. He's a very creative fellow. He had all these different innovations. When he owned the St. Louis Browns, he brought in a midget, Eddie Gadel, who was only like 3 feet tall, and had him bat in the game. And his number was like 1/8. And then later, Veeck owned the Chicago White Sox, and he had like this anti-disco music night where they burned disco music records, and it became a real problem with all the smoke. And Bill Veeck was really something, really an amazing guy. The sad thing is that when the Indians were winning the 1948 World Series, his marriage was falling apart, and he had his wife sued him for divorce. He was always out. He was very sociable. He'd be out drinking and talking to people. And so he had to, in the divorce settlement, he had to sell the Indians. He didn't have enough money to, and that was tragic, because we lost really the best owner that we've had in Cleveland Indians history. And later, as the Chicago White Sox manager, he had trouble because of the rising costs of player salaries. But a tremendous fellow. The next book is Now Pitching Bob Feller by Bob Feller with Bill Gilbert, 1990. Well, Bob Feller, Rapid Robert Feller, and I think he's the greatest starting pitcher in Cleveland Indians history, and he won more than 300 games from Van Meter, Iowa, to Cleveland. And boy, he did so well for the Cleveland Indians. He had a great fastball. That's why they called him Rapid Robert. My father and I actually had dinner with him at this fantasy day at Jacobs Field. Nice guy, real nice fellow. And his father actually built a baseball diamond on their farm in Van Meter. And so anyway, he died now. He was a long time. He worked for the Indians for a very long time, and real good fellow. And when we were there, and these other fellows and I, when we got to go on the field and hit batting practice, at one point he said, "Well, if you don't have my autograph by now, I guess you don't want it." So anyway, good fella, Bob Feller. He won a lot of games for Cleveland. The next book is Tribe Memories, The First Century by Russell Schneider, 2000. Yeah, this is a tremendous book. All these, he's going all the way back to these fellows who played for the Indians. Gaylord Perry, Buddy Bell, Charlie Spikes, George Hendrick, Rico Carty, Frank Robinson, heroes all. The next book is The Indians Baseball, 100 Years of Memories, the official 100th anniversary book of the Cleveland Indians, 2000. Yeah, this was published by the Cleveland Indians, and it goes way back to fellows like Cy Young, who pitched for Cleveland, and for whom the Cy Young Award is based. Cy Young actually played for the Cleveland Spiders, which was a National League franchise in the 1800s. In 1895, the Cleveland Spiders won the baseball championship. They won. There was no American League yet, so they were the Major League Baseball champions in 1895. And Cy Young was on that team, won 35 games. Yeah. So anyway, Napoleon Lajoie, who the Indians were for a time were called the Cleveland Naps, named after him. Tris Speaker, the player-manager of the 1920 Cleveland Indians, who won the World Series, played center field, and was also the manager. Earl Averill, who was my father's hero as a boy. Lou Boudreau, Herb Score, who became the voice of the Indians for a very long time, the radio voice, real good guy. Rocky Colavito, big hitter back in the late 50s. Sam McDowell, a pitcher in the 60s. Gaylord Perry, Jim Thome, Carlos Baerga, heroes all. The next book is Indians on the Game, Wayne Stewart, 2001. So this is a inside look at the Indians. One part, they interviewed Orel Hershiser, and he talked about the dessert cart at Jacobs Field, or now called Progressive Field. And one line in the book caught my attention. It goes like this, quote, "Way back in 1975. I thought that was kind of interesting, because I was, doesn't seem that long ago to me. The next book is Cy Young, A Baseball Life by Reed Browning, 2000. This is the story of the man behind the Cy Young Award. He grew up in Tuscarawas County, Ohio. He achieved glory as a Cleveland Spider. He also played for St. Louis, Boston, and came back to Cleveland, and was the manager of the 1913 Cleveland Green Sox, which must have been in a rival league. You know, sometimes they'd have these leagues that would come and go. He won 511 wins. That record will never be broken, because now it's very rare for a guy to get 300 wins. And Cy Young, the thing is, it's nice to read about a guy's life. As an old man, he didn't have children, and his wife had died, and actually he lost his farm, because farming's a tough business. So he was in his late 60s, and he had to get a job, and so he worked in a hotel as a clerk. But since he was a good guy, a couple realized, that he really needed help, so they invited him to stay with them. And they had a young daughter who, and Cy Young agreed to do that. At first he was reluctant, but they're good people and they cared about him. And he and Cy Young became close to their daughter, who was a girl. And so it was nice. It shows you that if you're a good person, things will work out for you, because he was a very good man. The next book is Safe at Home, A Baseball Life Story by Sharon Hargrove and Richard Howard Costa, 1989. This is the story of Sharon Hargrove, the wife of Mike Hargrove, and shows what the wives go through, all the moving. Boy, and Hargrove, when they move from minor league teams, and then when they get traded, he moved as a player, and then as he got into managing all the different cities he moved in, and of course they had a family, they had children. And this was hard. And she talks about all the moving they had, and how hard it was for the kids when their father was away so much. They're growing up without their father. So Mike Hargrove was a tremendous player in the 1980s for Cleveland, and then the manager in the late 90s. Did a real good guy. Very kind of subdued, but he's a very good fellow. Apparently he hasn't gotten over the 1997 World Series since we had the lead in Game 7 of the ninth inning and lost. The next book is Indian Summer by Brian McDonald, 2003. This is the story of Louis Sockalexis, who was the first Native American to play Major League Baseball, and the Cleveland Indians are named after him. He was a Penobscot Indian from Maine, and in 1897, on the Cleveland Spiders, they renamed the team the Indians, I guess informally, and Sockalexis was the biggest star in baseball in 1897. Tragically, alcoholism destroyed him, and some say he could have been the best player ever. He had power, he could run, but this very tragic. He developed a drinking problem, and this destroyed his career. And he died relatively young. Anyway, God bless Louis Sockalexis. The next book is Whatever Happened to Super Joe? Catching Up with 45 Good Old Guys from the Bad Old Days of the Cleveland Indians by Russell Schneider, 2006. And so the author, Russell Schneider, he found these fellows, from who had been stars years ago, and found out, wanted to see how they were doing and catch up on them, see how their lives had gone. So he found Joe Charbonneau, who was the star in 1980, Corey Snyder, who, interestingly, his career didn't do so well. He started off very well, and then it turns out in this book that Snyder was a Mormon, and Mormons don't drink, and that was a problem in the culture. There was a lot of drinking in Major League Baseball players, and so that kind of affected him, because they thought, oh, you're not a part of the group, because he wouldn't go to the bar and drink. I think that affected his career. Dave LaRoche, the tremendous relief pitcher in the 70s. Chris Chambliss, we got to see him on the Yankees. He had a home run in 76 to put him in the World Series. Pat Tabler, Al Ashby, who had a great career actually with Houston. We should have kept him. Charlie Spikes, who was my first hero. Joe Liss, good guy. Jim Bibby, won a World Series with Pittsburgh. Wayne Garland signed him to a big contract. Dick Bosman, who threw a no-hitter for Cleveland. I was actually on a bus going to New Mexico for Boy Scout camping, and I heard the first 3 innings on a radio before it faded out. And anyway, he threw a no-hitter. Dwayne Kuiper, great second baseman. Fred Bean, who's Actually, I think he was the scout who signed the guy from The Rookie, in the movie The Rookie, the old guy who played the baseball, relatively older. Frank Duffy, the shortstop. Jim Kern, another great relief pitcher. Jack Brohammer, Doug Jones. So I wrote in my book diary, the 1970s Cleveland Indians rule the world. The next book is Dealing, the Cleveland Indians' New Ball Game by Terry Pluto. 2006. This is the story of inside the front office in the process of rebuilding a contender. You know, it was very tough when the Indians they were a strong, they were a strong contender from 1994 to 2001, and then because of financial issues, we had to rebuild the team. We couldn't afford these players, so that was tough. And then right around that time, the Jacobs brothers sold the team to Larry Dolan. A lot of fans blamed Dolan because the team was lousy, but they were able to rebuild. In 2007, we got to the ALCS. It had a 3-1 lead, couldn't hold it. So this book is defending Larry Dolan, Mark Shapiro, and Eric Wedge. I think Eric Wedge was a little bit too hard, drove the guys a little bit too hard. The next book is Glory Days in Tribe Town, the Cleveland Indians and Jacobs Field, 1994 to 1997, by Terry Pluto and Tom Hamilton, 2014. Yeah, so those were tremendous years. I think that John Hart made a mistake by trading Carlos Baerga in 1996, and he cut Eddie Murray's salary after the 1995 season. And then we let Paul Sereno go, who was our first baseman in 1995. I felt that John Hart tinkered too much with the Indians. But anyway, we had an awful lot of good times with Jim Thome, Albert Bell, Kenny Lofton, Manny Ramirez, Orel Hershiser, Charlie Nagy, Sandy Alomar, and Jose Mesa. The next book is The Making of Major League by Jonathan Knight, 2015. I met the author at the Rocky River, Ohio book fair in 2015. He also wrote a book on the 1980 Browns. He's a good guy. This book is about the 1989 movie Major League, which was really, really wonderful movie. It had these wonderful characters: Rick Wild Thing Vaughn, played by Charlie Sheen, Willie Mays Hayes, Roger Dorn, Pedro Serrano, Jake Taylor, and in the movie they win the division. And I remember going to see the movie in 1989, and I cried. And now, the author, Jonathan Knight, makes the case that this movie helped the Indians sort of change the way of thinking and helped the Indians become a contender in the late 90s. And they, of course, they made the sequel where the Indians, get to the World Series, but and then that was part two. And part three, it's not even the Indians; it's a minor league team for the Twins. So they need to make a Major League 4 that has the Indians winning the World Series. The next book is Omar, My Life on and Off the Field, Memoirs of a Gold Glove Shortstop by Omar Vizquel and Bob Dyer, 2003. Vizquel talks about his life growing up in Venezuela and what that was like in Latin America. I actually had a bobblehead with him and Davey Concepcion that the Indians gave away because they were both, Concepcion played for the Cincinnati Reds. They were both tremendous shortstops from Venezuela. And so Vizquel was a very, you need to win, you need a good shortstop because that's a tough position. Long throw from the hole. And then especially when Roberto Alomar was in boy, did we have a double play combination. He talks about he was into music, he was into art. And then he talks about in the 1997 World Series, Game 7 in the ninth inning, when he went to the mound with some other players to talk with Jose Mesa. And he said Mesa had a sort of a blank look on his face. And he thought he knew we were in trouble because Mesa was sort of apparently overwhelmed by naturally, this is a very tough situation. And he couldn't hold the lead. Later, Mesa was pretty mad about these comments. And I think he beamed him in a game later. The next book is City of Champions, the story of the 1948 Cleveland Barons, Browns, and Indians by Kevin O'Connell, 1997. In 1948, Cleveland's all three teams won championships. The Barons in the American Hockey League were champions. The Browns in the All-American Football Conference also won the title. And, of course, the Indians in baseball, Major League Baseball. So this is all these fellas. Gene Bearden, who was won a big game. Bob Lemon, who was a great pitcher. And he also talks about these other players like Bun Cook, who was, I think, the coach of the Barons, and Paul Brown, the coach of the Browns. The next book is Municipal Stadium, Memories on the Lakefront, edited by George Cormack, 1999. A 50-year pictorial history from 1931 to 1981. It has 481 photographs from the Cleveland Press collection. Boy, the old stadium, I just really loved going there. I felt so bad when I really felt bad when they tore it down. But I guess it had to happen. A lot of memories for me. Went to a lot of games with my father in the 1970s. We would park up the street, walk down, walk to the stadium to Gate A, enter at Gate A, and we'd always get upper reserve between home and first, and we get a hot dog and a Coke and watch the game. And there wasn't much. It wasn't like today. There weren't any thrills. It was just baseball. You walk up those ramps to the upper deck, and then the catwalk was kind of scary up to the seats. And you walk out all that grass, huge field. Went to a lot of games, and it was pretty cheap. I think it was like $3.50 for a ticket, and it wasn't much to buy. They didn't have all the things that people buy now. A lot of good times in the 1970s. The old Cleveland Municipal Stadium. The next book is Cleveland Stadium: The Last Chapter by James A. Toman and Gregory G. Deegan, 1997. So this is the final years of the stadium. The Indians had their last year in 1994 or 1993, and then they moved to Jacobs Field the following year. And the Browns had their last year in 1995 because they moved to Baltimore and became the Browns. So, it was torn down in 1996, and I was overseas. I always said I would come and stand in front of the bulldozer when they tore it down. But eventually I went to this Jacobs Field. Was such a beautiful field. And now the First Energy Stadium is real nice also. But anyway, I have very fond memories of the old Cleveland Municipal Stadium. I remember we entered one time. They were playing They're playing the song "Happy Days Are Here Again," which was the campaign song of Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1932. And whenever I hear that song, "Happy days are here again, the skies above are clear again. Let us sing a song of cheer again. Happy days are here again. Your cares and troubles are gone. There'll be no more from now on. Happy days are here again. The skies above are clear again. Let us sing a song of cheer again. Happy days are here again." Anyway, that was playing, and when we entered Gate A, boy. The next book is Heroes, Scamps, and Good Guys, 101 Colorful Characters from Cleveland Sports History by Bob Dolgan, 2003. Bob Dolgan was another sports writer. And in this book, he has the three sports. Talked about Gaylord Perry, tremendous pitcher. I remember Gaylord Perry threw out the first pitch a few years ago. I was real happy they brought him back. Jim Brown, for the Browns, and Mark Price for the Cavs. Other fellows. Actually, Albert Bell was kind of a difficult guy, and you wonder if the Indians would have won the World Series in 1995 if he'd been like a positive guy instead of sort of angry. So anyway, lots of wonderful memories of the Cleveland Indians over the years that I have for all these players. And even though the Indians in the 70s didn't, I don't think we finished higher than fourth in any year. We were contenders sometimes. I think in '76 we were contenders for a while. And so anyway, it's okay. I love thinking about if I ever run into those guys. I'm real happy because they're really. They're part of my youth, nostalgia. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.